The maid discovers the millionaire's baby abandoned in the rain. Her gesture will make you cry. It was raining as if the sky had split open. Raindrops pounded endlessly against the pavement, blending with the howling wind that made the entire city of Houston feel trapped in an unending storm. It was 11:30 p.m., the hour when most people had already gone home, leaving only a few dim lights flickering in the office towers downtown. Elena Rivera was finishing up the last few trash bags on the 24th floor of Lawson Enterprises. The smell of cleaning chemicals mixed with the monotonous hum of the old vacuum, the same dull rhythm that had defined her life for the past 3 years. Her job wasn't anything special, mopping floors, collecting trash, scrubbing tiles. But it was the only thing keeping her afloat, paying for rent in her shabby apartment and medicine for Mrs. Delgado, her elderly landlady whom she loved like a mother. She turned off the hallway lights, threw on a thin raincoat, and stepped outside. The rain had grown heavier. The wind ripped her flimsy coat open, sending cold water down her back. She bowed her head, counting her steps as she walked, trying to find some warmth in the faint sound of the tiny radio tucked inside her pocket. Then she heard it, a faint, fragile sound cutting through the storm, like a kitten's mewl, but when she listened more closely, her heart clenched. It wasn't a cat. It was the cry of a child. Elena lifted her head, scanning the rain-soaked sidewalk. The sound came again, trembling, broken, desperate. She ran toward it, splashing through puddles until she reached a soggy cardboard box pushed up against the building wall. Under the dim, flickering streetlight, she saw a baby girl curled up inside, wrapped in a thin pink blanket, soaked through and cold as ice. The tiny face was pale and bluish, lips trembling, the weak whimper slicing straight through Elena's heart. "Oh, God!" she gasped, kneeling down and scooping the child into her trembling arms. The small body was freezing. Elena held her close, shielding her from the rain, and rushed back into the building. Inside the lobby, she laid the baby on a sofa, grabbed a dry cleaning towel from her supply closet, and wrapped it around the child. As she gently brushed the wet hair from the girl's face, she noticed a crumpled note tucked inside the blanket. "I can't do this anymore. Please take care of her. I'm sorry." Elena froze. The handwriting was shaky, the ink smudged by rain. She looked down at the baby, now breathing weakly, eyelids fluttering, and felt tears fall onto the child's cheek. She fumbled for her phone, ready to call the police, when the elevator doors slid open. A man stepped out, tall, dressed in a black suit, his face wet from the storm. He was speaking urgently into his phone, his voice rough and strained. "No, still nothing. Keep looking for her. Find my daughter, Ava." Elena went still. The man stopped, his eyes locking onto the child in her arms. "What?" His voice broke. The phone slipped from his hand as he rushed forward, his trembling fingers brushing over the baby's face. "Ava," he whispered, tears mixing with rain. "Ava, my little girl." Elena stood frozen. The man clutched the baby to his chest, murmuring prayers of gratitude. After a few moments, he turned to her, eyes glistening. You found my daughter?" Elena only nodded, still in shock. "Please," he said, voice desperate, "help me get her to the hospital. I'm Gabriel Lawson." The name struck her. He was the owner of Lawson Enterprises, the man whose building she cleaned every night. Peace this stormy night would change her life forever. They rushed out into the pouring rain. A black car was waiting right in front of the building, its driver jumping out with a panicked look. Gabriel placed baby Ava into Elena's arms, his voice trembling as he said, "Hold her tight, please." Elena wrapped her arms around the baby, shielding her tiny head with her own coat. Gabriel climbed into the front seat, his deep voice urgent and commanding. "To Memorial Hospital, now!" The car sped off through the white curtain of rain. Elena looked down at Ava. The baby's lips were pale, her breathing growing weaker. Panic welled up inside her. She began gently rubbing the little chest, trying to keep her warm while whispering silent prayers. Gabriel glanced back at her through the rearview mirror. His eyes were bloodshot, filled with the raw fear of a father on the brink of losing his child. Elena met his gaze, and in that instant she no longer saw the powerful CEO, but a man utterly broken by helplessness. When they reached the hospital, everything blurred into chaos. Doctors rushed toward them, pulling a gurney and taking Ava into the emergency room. Gabriel clung to the doorframe, while Elena stood behind him, her hands still trembling. A nurse approached and asked her a few questions. Elena recounted everything: the cry, the cardboard box, the note. The nurse nodded, jotted down the details, then hurried away. Gabriel sank into a chair, his hands clutching his head. Elena didn't know what to say. She just sat beside him in silence. After a long pause, his voice broke through the stillness. "For the past 3 days, I don't even know how I've been breathing." She took Ava and disappeared without a word. Elena stayed quiet, waiting. Lauren, my wife, changed after giving birth. She stopped sleeping, stopped eating, and sometimes she looked at Ava as if she were a stranger. I thought it was just exhaustion. I didn't realize. His voice cracked. Elena whispered softly, "You did the right thing, going out to find them." He looked at her then, his dark eyes heavy, reflecting the storm outside. "If it weren't for you, Ava might have—" He couldn't finish. He just shook his head. Moments later, a doctor came out, face serious but relieved. "She'll be all right. Hypothermia, but you brought her in just in time. Thank God." Gabriel shot to his feet. Tears flooded his eyes, this time from sheer relief. Elena rose too, and when he turned to her, the look he gave made her heart ache. "Thank you," he said quietly. "I owe you my daughter's life." She smiled faintly, her voice soft as a breath. "I only did what anyone would have done." He shook his head. "No, not everyone would stop in the middle of a storm, Miss Rivera." The sound of her name in his voice stirred something inside her, something warm yet distant, like a forgotten memory being gently awakened. They sat together in the hospital corridor until dawn. The rain outside had finally stopped. Gabriel drifted off in the chair, exhaustion overtaking him, while Elena gazed out the window at the faint streaks of light breaking through the gray clouds. She didn't know why she was still there, maybe because of his eyes, or the little girl lying in the room beyond those doors. But one thing she knew for certain: from that night on, her life had changed forever. 3 days after that stormy night, Elena still couldn't quite believe it had all been real. News of the baby girl abandoned during the storm had spread across every local paper, but no one knew that it was Elena, the quiet janitor, who had carried the child through the rain. No one knew that, from that night on, something inside her had changed, silently but profoundly. Elena returned to work as usual, sweeping the lobby, wiping the glass doors, moving quietly through the halls. Yet in her mind, the image of little Ava and Gabriel Lawson's eyes filled with gratitude refused to fade. She didn't know why, but for the first time in years, she felt she had done something that truly mattered. That afternoon, as she finished mopping the stairs on the 18th floor, a voice startled her. "Elena Rivera?" She turned around. Gabriel Lawson was standing at the end of the corridor, not in his usual suit, but in a rolled-up white shirt, his eyes shadowed from lack of sleep. "Mr. Lawson?" she stammered, setting the mop aside. He nodded slightly and stepped closer. "I've been looking everywhere for you. You're not easy to find." Elena gave an awkward smile. "I'm just the cleaning lady, sir. Someone like me isn't worth looking for." He paused, the corners of his mouth softening. "No, Elena, you're the reason my daughter is still breathing. People like you are rare and unforgettable." They sat together in a small cafe on the ground floor of the building. Gabriel told her that Ava was recovering well and staying at home with a private nurse. The doctor said if you hadn't found her when you did, even 10 minutes later, the outcome would have been different, he said, his voice trembling. Elena lowered her head and murmured, "I just followed my instincts." Gabriel was silent for a few seconds, then reached into his briefcase and pulled out an envelope. "I want you to work for me, not here, but at my home, as Ava's nanny." Elena froze. "What? Me? But I don't have qualifications. I've never cared for children before." He smiled gently. "You did what an entire team of trained nurses couldn't. You saved her life. Ava needs you, and—" He hesitated. "I trust you." Elena looked down at the envelope. Inside was an official employment contract with a salary 10 times higher than her current one and accommodation in the Lawson family estate. She was speechless. A wave of joy and fear washed over her. She had never left her poor neighborhood, never imagined stepping into a world so different from her own. That night, she told Mrs. Delgado everything. The elderly woman listened quietly, then smiled kindly. "Maybe this is the opportunity God is sending you, Elena. You've spent your whole life caring for others, but never once for yourself." Elena held the old woman's hand, feeling its familiar warmth. "But what about my job here?" she asked softly. Mrs. Delgado chuckled. "When one door closes, don't be afraid to walk through the one that's opening. Don't be afraid, my dear." That night, Elena barely slept. She thought of Ava, the baby who had softened her heart, and of Gabriel's eyes, carrying both sorrow and hope. And the next morning, as the first rays of sunlight streamed through her window, she made her decision. Elena carefully folded her old uniform and placed it into her small travel bag. Outside, a black car was already waiting. Gabriel Lawson stood beside it, a folder in his hand. When she approached, he smiled. "Welcome to your new home, Elena." And so, beneath the golden morning light of Houston, Elena left her old life behind, to begin a journey whose destination she could not yet imagine. The Lawson family home was located in the western suburbs of Houston, nestled in a quiet neighborhood lined with old oak trees on both sides of the street. When the car stopped in front of the gate, Elena had to take a moment to believe that the place was real. A light-colored mansion stood before her, vast and elegant, making her feel small, as though she had stepped into another world. Gabriel stepped out first and opened the door for her. "Don't worry," he said gently. "Everyone here is very kind." The first person Elena met was Rosa, the elderly housekeeper with a warm, motherly smile. "You must be Miss Elena. Welcome to the Lawson home," Rosa said, her voice carrying a comforting tone. Elena nodded and replied softly, "It's an honor." "Thank you." Her room was on the second floor, right next to baby Ava's, a small, bright room with a window overlooking the rose garden. Everything was pristine and tidy, a stark contrast to the damp little apartment she had once called home. On her first morning there, Elena woke up early to the sound of birdsong mingled with the aroma of coffee drifting up from the kitchen below. She found Ava in her crib, smiling, wide-eyed, full of life. Elena picked her up, cradling her gently. From that moment, she knew she was bound to this child by an invisible thread. In the days that followed, life in the grand house gradually became familiar. Elena learned how to measure the milk's temperature, change diapers, lull the baby to sleep, and record notes for the nurse to review. Gabriel was always busy, but almost every night he would stop by his daughter's room, sitting quietly beside her crib for a few minutes, his gaze tender yet heavy. One evening, as Elena played with Ava on the nursery floor, Gabriel stood in the doorway, watching for a long time before saying, "It's been a while since I've heard her laugh like that." Elena smiled. She loves music, especially gentle singing. I think it makes her feel safe. He nodded, his eyes dimming with sadness. Lauren used to sing to her every night. This house has been silent for too long. His words made Elena's heart ache. She understood then that behind the image of the successful man stood a grief that had never healed. One evening, while she was tidying up Ava's toys in the living room, Gabriel walked in. He had just returned from work, tie loosened, exhaustion written across his face. "Can I ask you something, Elena?" he said quietly. "Yes?" "Aren't you afraid of me? Of the way people talk about me? I know there are rumors." Elena set down the toy and met his gaze. "I don't believe in rumors. I only believe what I see. And what I see is a father trying his best to keep his family together." He stared at her for a long moment before nodding slightly. "Thank you." That night, after putting Ava to bed, Elena went out to the garden. The soft light spilling from the house cast a golden glow over the grass and trees. She sat down on a wooden bench, thinking about her life, the lonely years, her mother, the dreams she once had, but never reached. For the first time in a long while, Elena didn't feel afraid anymore. Perhaps at last she had found the place where she truly belonged. The days in the Lawson household passed peacefully until one evening in March, when the rain returned without warning, just like the night Elena first met Ava. That day, Gabriel came home late. Elena had just put Ava to sleep when the sound of the phone rang from the living room. His voice echoed down the hall, hoarse, trembling, and disoriented. "What? Where? She's alive?" Elena froze. Seconds later, Gabriel came rushing down the stairs, his shirt half-buttoned, his hand gripping the phone tightly. His face was pale, his eyes filled with panic. "Elena," he gasped, "I have to go. They just found Lauren." She stood still. "She's alive?" He nodded, his voice breaking. "They found her in a motel on the outskirts of the city. She tried to take her own life, but she's still breathing." Elena didn't know what to say, only nodded gently. "Go. Don't worry about Ava. I'll stay with her." He looked at her for a brief second, as if wanting to say something but couldn't, then turned and ran out into the downpour. The door slammed shut behind him, leaving the house steeped in a heavy, suffocating silence. Elena picked Ava up and held the baby close against her chest. The faint scent of milk lingered in the air, her tiny breaths steady and calm. Through the window, the rain blurred the light outside. Inside Elena's heart, a strange mix of tenderness, fear, and sorrow spread quietly. That night, she didn't sleep. She sat beside Ava's crib, waiting for the sound of his car returning. But morning came. The rain stopped, and only a pale sunlight filtered through the curtains. Gabriel didn't come back until 3 days later. He entered the house like a shadow, thinner, paler, his eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep. "How is she?" Elena asked softly. He sat down on the couch, his hands clasped tightly together. "Lauren's at the hospital. The doctors say she has severe postpartum psychosis, hallucinations, depression. Sometimes she doesn't even recognize her own child." Elena nodded, her throat tightening. "You'll stay with her, won't you?" she asked. "Of course," he replied immediately, then fell silent for a long moment. "But what scares me most is, I don't know how to love her anymore. Not because I've stopped loving her, but because I don't know who she is now." Elena looked at him, saw in his eyes the exhaustion of a man fighting a battle inside his own heart. "Gabriel," she said gently, "sometimes love doesn't mean staying forever. Sometimes love means helping the other person find themselves again." He lifted his head, his gaze meeting hers. And what are you helping me find, Elena?" Her heart skipped a beat. Elena didn't answer. She only gave a faint, wistful smile. "I only know how to listen." He smiled weakly, tired but sincere. "Maybe that's what's keeping me alive." That night, as he went upstairs to see Ava, Elena stood by the staircase, watching his shadow disappear into the soft glow of the hallway light. She knew from that very moment something between them had begun to change. Something fragile, unnamed, yet undeniable. Without realizing it, they had crossed the invisible line between comfort and longing into the quiet, dangerous territory of the heart. Since that night, the Lawson house had grown strangely quiet. Though Ava's laughter still echoed each morning, though the scent of coffee still drifted through the kitchen, there was something in the air, a soft, invisible sadness that lingered within those polished walls. Gabriel spoke less. He spent most of his time at the hospital with Lauren, returning home only when it was late. Each time Elena heard his car stop outside the gate, her heart tightened, a mix of relief, worry, and something she couldn't name. One night, as she was rocking Ava to sleep, he entered the room. His suit was rumpled, his eyes red and weary. He sat beside the crib, saying nothing at first, just watching his sleeping daughter. "I'm afraid," he whispered after a long silence. "Afraid that even if Lauren comes back, she'll never be the woman I once knew." Elena looked at him, her voice as soft as breath. "Sometimes we have to learn to love a new person within the old one we used to know." He lifted his gaze, eyes deep and searching. "You always say things that make me think, Elena." She smiled faintly, trying to hide the tremor in her chest. "I only say what feels true." A long silence followed. Then he asked quietly, "Do you ever feel like life has brought you somewhere you don't belong?" Elena's heart tightened at the question. "I used to feel that way every single day," she said softly. "But not anymore." He looked at her, not as an employer looking at his employee, but as someone finally recognizing a kindred soul. In the days that followed, something began to shift between them. Gabriel started talking to her more, sometimes about Ava, sometimes about small, ordinary things. The weather, work, childhood memories. Elena didn't know when it happened, but she realized that every time she heard his footsteps at the door, her heart reacted before her mind could stop it. One weekend night, after she had put Ava to bed, Gabriel appeared with 2 cups of tea. "You're still awake?" he asked. "Yes," she said softly, just waiting for her to fall fully asleep. "Then sit with me for a while," he said, handing her a cup. They sat on the porch, watching the distant lights flicker like falling stars over the lake. A gentle breeze carried the faint scent of jasmine. "Do you remember that stormy night?" he asked. "How could I forget?" She smiled. "That night, I thought I was saving a child. But in truth..." "In truth what?" "That child was the one who saved me." He was silent for a long time before murmuring, "And maybe you saved me too." His words made Elena's breath hitch. The air between them grew heavy, warm, uncertain, fragile. She could feel his nearness, his breath mingling with hers, close enough to make her heart race. "Gabriel," she whispered. He turned to her, his eyes glowing with a tender yet fierce light. "Elena, I don't know if this is right or wrong, but every time I see you with Ava, I feel like I'm home." Elena shook her head, her voice trembling. "Don't say that. You still have a wife. I don't want to be the reason someone else hurts more." He was silent for a moment, then spoke softly. "I know, and maybe that's what scares me the most, because for the first time in so long, I feel my heart beating again." She couldn't find the words to answer. Outside, the rain began to fall softly, each drop tapping against the railing like the whisper of fate. Elena stood up, trying to escape the storm of emotions rising inside her. "We should stop here," she said quietly, "because if we take one more step, there'll be no going back." He rose too, his eyes still fixed on her. "Maybe you're right," he murmured, "but I wish, someday, you'll stop being afraid to love." Elena pressed her lips together, lowered her gaze, and turned away. Inside her, a storm began to stir, just like that fateful night. And deep down, she knew. Between her and him, nothing would ever be the same again. April arrived with gentle sunlight and the faint scent of jasmine drifting through the garden. Ava had learned to roll over and babble a few sounds that made both Elena and Rosa burst into laughter. The Lawson house began to fill with life again, small bursts of joy that slowly dissolved the last traces of lingering sorrow. Gabriel still spent much of his time at the hospital. He spoke less than before, yet whenever he returned home, there was something different in his eyes, no longer the despair of a broken man, but the calm resolve of someone learning to accept. One evening, as Elena was folding laundry in the living room, he walked in with a faint smile. "Lauren's doing better," he said. "She's talking again. She even asked to see Ava." Elena looked up, surprised. "Really? I'm happy for you, for both of you." He nodded and sat down. "The doctor said she's starting to understand what happened, and she's learning to forgive herself." He paused, then added softly, "I guess I'm trying to do the same." Elena looked at him, something warm stirring inside her. "You don't need to forgive yourself, Gabriel. You've done everything you could." He shook his head slightly. "I'm not sure about that. But there's one thing I do know. Without you, I wouldn't have had the strength to keep going." Elena smiled faintly, saying nothing. Between them, the only sound was the ticking clock, and a quiet warmth filling the space. One weekend morning, Elena received a phone call from Mrs. Delgado. Her voice was weak but gentle. "Elena, I miss you, dear. When you have time, come see me, won't you?" Elena asked Gabriel for the afternoon off to visit. He nodded immediately. "Go. Rosa and I will watch Ava." Mrs. Delgado's home was just as Elena remembered, small and cozy. The elderly woman lay in her armchair, her face thinner, but her smile still kind. Elena took her hand, feeling the warmth of her wrinkled skin. "You've changed," the old woman said. "There's light in your eyes now. They're not sad anymore." Elena smiled softly. "Maybe because I found something that makes me want to live better." "The baby?" Elena nodded. "And her father, too." Mrs. Delgado's gaze softened with both affection and worry. "Elena, sometimes God sends someone not so that you can belong to them, but so you can discover your own worth. Remember that." Elena held her hand tighter, silent. Deep down, she understood, and she was afraid because she knew she had fallen in love with someone she shouldn't. That afternoon, when she returned, Gabriel was in the garden playing with Ava. The sunlight caught his hair, and the oak trees swayed gently in the breeze. The scene was peaceful, almost dreamlike, and it made her heart ache. When he saw her, he smiled. "You're back. I just got a call from the doctor. Lauren wants to meet you." Elena froze. "Me? Why?" "She said she wants to thank the woman who saved her daughter, and to apologize." Elena didn't know whether to feel nervous or relieved, but the next morning she went with Gabriel to the hospital. Lauren was sitting in the therapy garden, her hair cut short, her face pale, but her eyes clear again. When she saw them, she stood up and smiled faintly. "Elena," she said softly, "I've heard everything. Thank you for saving Ava, and for being there for Gabriel when I couldn't." Elena shook her head gently. "It's nothing. I only did what anyone would have done." Lauren looked down at her hands, then spoke slowly. "I hated myself for not being strong enough to be a mother. But because of you, I realized Ava had someone who truly loved her when I couldn't, and that brings me peace." Gabriel placed a hand on his wife's shoulder, his eyes glistening. "Lauren," she turned to him and smiled faintly. "You don't owe me anything. What you need to do now is live for Ava and for yourself." Elena turned away, her eyes stinging. In that moment, she understood. Some encounters aren't meant for love, but to save one another from their own darkness. That night, as she rocked Ava to sleep, Gabriel stood in the doorway, light falling across his tired face. "She's going to be okay," he said softly. "And I think I'll be okay too, because of you." Elena smiled. "No, Gabriel, you saved yourself." He was quiet for a moment, then stepped closer, his gaze steady and sincere. "Maybe, but Elena, you've made me believe there's still something good waiting ahead," she answered softly. "And I believe you deserve it." In the quiet room, only Ava's gentle breathing and Elena's pounding heartbeat remained. She knew that both of them had changed, no longer two broken souls searching for escape, but two people learning how to forgive the past, others, and themselves. A month after the meeting at the hospital, life slowly returned to its steady rhythm. Gabriel often took Ava to visit her mother, while Elena stayed at home, preparing the baby's meals, writing in her daily health journal, and keeping to the quiet routines she had built. Lauren's recovery was faster than anyone expected. She began art therapy, and soon she was sketching her first new design in months, her face radiant, her eyes calm. Every time Gabriel brought Ava to visit, Lauren held the little girl for a long while. The sight softened Elena's heart, though somewhere deep inside there was still a faint unspoken ache. One morning, Gabriel told her that Lauren wanted to see her. "She said she has something to give you." Elena visited the treatment center on a bright sunny afternoon. Lauren greeted her with a gentle smile, looking healthier and more peaceful than ever. "Elena," she said warmly, "thank you, not just for Ava, but for Gabriel too. You helped him find his way back to life." Elena shook her head softly. "No, Lauren, he stood up on his own. I was just there when he needed someone beside him." Lauren gazed at her for a long moment, then reached into her bag and took out a white envelope. "I've signed the divorce papers," she said calmly. "Not out of anger, but because I've learned to let go. Gabriel deserves a new beginning, and I think that person is you." Elena froze, unable to speak. Lauren reached out and took her hand, her eyes filled with a serene kindness. "Love him the way you love Ava, gently, selflessly, without asking for anything in return. Only that kind of love can heal." When Elena left the center, a soft breeze carried the scent of jasmine through the air. Her heart felt both heavy and light, as though she were carrying a quiet, sacred blessing. That evening, as she was lulling Ava to sleep, Gabriel knocked on her door. He stepped inside, holding a small box. "Lauren asked me to give you this," he said, setting it on the table. Inside was a sapphire ring, its deep blue glimmering like the sky before rain. Elena looked up, surprised. "This is—" Gabriel smiled gently. "It's from me. Lauren knows, and she approves. It's not an engagement ring. It's a promise that I'll wait until you're ready, that I want you in my life, not as an employee, but as my true companion." Elena's eyes filled with tears. "Gabriel, I don't know what to say." He stepped closer, brushing away a tear from her cheek. "Just tell me you're not leaving." She smiled through her tears. "I'm not going anywhere." He placed the ring in her hand. "And I'm going to help you finish what you once dreamed of. I've enrolled you in nursing school. I want you to live for yourself, Elena." She began to cry again, but this time from pure joy. "You're crazy," she said, laughing between her sobs. He laughed too. "If believing in something good makes me crazy, then I'll gladly be." They sat together for a long time, watching Ava sleep peacefully. Outside, a soft wind blew, carrying the scent of fading rain. Elena took his hand and whispered, "Thank you for believing in me." Gabriel squeezed her hand gently. "No, Elena, you're the one who made me believe in tomorrow." And in the tender light of dusk, as the sapphire ring shimmered on her hand, Elena understood. Some promises don't need vows. They only need to be kept wholeheartedly, with love. A year later, Houston blossomed into a new spring. The sky was clear, the jasmine in the garden bloomed white once again, and Ava, the little girl who had once lain curled up in a cardboard box during a storm, was now running around the house, laughing and calling out, "Mama?" Shapka. Every time Elena heard that word, her heart trembled. She had never imagined that anyone would ever call her that. Their life now was peaceful in a way that once seemed impossible. Elena had returned to nursing school as promised and was finishing her final year. By day, she attended classes. By night, she cared for Ava and helped Rosa with dinner. Gabriel was still busy with work, but no matter how late he came home, he always made time to read a few pages of a bedtime story to Ava before she slept. Lauren was also doing well. She had gone back to being an architect, living in a small apartment near the city center. Occasionally, she visited Ava, bringing along wooden toys she had made herself. Each time, she smiled softly at Elena and said, "Thank you for keeping her safe." And Elena always replied, "Thank you for giving me the chance to love her." One afternoon, Elena was studying by the window. Sunlight filtered through the curtains, glinting off the sapphire ring on her hand. Gabriel walked in, carrying a steaming cup of coffee. He sat beside her in silence for a moment before saying quietly, "You know, sometimes I still think about that stormy night. If you hadn't stopped, if you just kept walking like everyone else." Elena smiled, gazing out into the garden where Ava was running between the trees. Maybe fate always knows how to lead us to the right place, even if it's through the storm. He took her hand and squeezed it gently. "And I know everything started to change the moment I met you." Elena rested her head on his shoulder, feeling his familiar warmth. Outside, the sky began to mist with light rain. The first drops tapped against the window, the sound of another beginning. She whispered softly, almost to herself, "That night, I thought I was saving a life, but in truth, that life saved mine." Ava's laughter echoed from the yard. Gabriel tightened his grip on her hand, and amidst the falling rain, Elena understood that life, no matter how full of storms, always finds its way home through one simple truth. Love always finds its way back.